Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Saurabh Jindal. I'm here to talk about intermittent fasting and I'm here to talk about how hunger in fact reduces when you do intermittent fasting. What is intermittent fasting or IF for short? It's an eating pattern that breaks your day into two parts, eating or the feeding window and fasting or the non-eating window. You are starving yourself. It's a very common comment we get when I talk about intermittent fasting to patients. But IF is not the same as starving. Without a doubt, uncontrollable hunger is the most common worry about fasting. Most people think that they are going to become so hungry that they will ultimately overeat. Most so called experts say have multiple small meals through the day. What intermittent fasting says would be to have two meals, even one meal per day. People think, how could I willingly invite hunger into my life? I have always wanted to avoid hunger. Why should I invite it into my life? Hunger is a feeling as humans we have always tried to avoid. We learn this from very early life, but we should know that there is a bit of difference between appetite and hunger. What is the difference? Let's see that. Appetite is a feeling that we want to eat. This is easily triggered even with a few hours of your last meal just with the sight or smell of food. Even boredom can make us feel hungry. Just because we are watching a movie or watching TV, we are conditioned to have something to eat. Is that hunger? Obviously not. The reason restaurants spend so much of time and energy on food presentation and plating is because they understand that our eating basically begins with our eyes, not at the first bite. Eating with appetite is more of an emotional, mental need for food. That is why we eat so much, and that's why we have so many diseases of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular events. Actual hunger is something different. Actual hunger starts many hours after your last meal. In fact, if you would eat by actual hunger, not by appetite, we would actually not be eating so much. We'll be eating much lesser, maybe twice, even once a day. Intermittent fasting is what helps you get you towards this actual hunger dominated feeding rather than appetite dominating feeding. Consider how hungry you feel first thing in the morning when you get up. Not much. Studies of circadian rhythm in fact confirm that for most people, hunger is very low in the morning when they get up. Even though they have not eaten for maybe 8, 9 or 10 hours through their sleep time. Conversely, hunger is a lot during the dinner time. It is very high because the hunger hormone, which is ghrelin, basically spikes up at about 8 p.m. Even though we have often eaten something just a few hours ago. And now you understand why hunger is often misunderstood by people. Remember, when we feel hungry, what do we do? In the morning when we get up, we feel hungry though we are not really hungry. So what do? We break our fast, we break our overnight fast, and we start having a carbohydrate rich meal, which is usually the breakfast is going to be dominated by carbohydrates. We'll have cereals, we'll have breads, we'll have some kind of wheat based product. With that, what happens? There's a lot of carbohydrate coming into your system. This carbohydrate is going to be broken down in your body to glucose. So even though the meal is not sweet, even still becomes glucose when it enters your system. This glucose, which is the dietary glucose that you have consumed in your gut, now enters your blood vessels. Now, when it enters the blood vessel, there's a spike of a lot of sugar in your blood. This glucose has to enter the cell energy production. But look at this cell. This red circle denotes a cell. The glucose has to enter, but the glucose cannot enter because there's a lock. So there is a lock which prevents this glucose from directly entering the cell. This glucose needs some help, and the help is actually insulin. So the pancreas, the gland in your body secretes insulin. This insulin is a key, and this key opens this lock. So this now opens the lock, as you can see, and the glucose now rushes in into your cell. This glucose enters the cell more and more, and the glucose is reduced now outside the cell. So your blood levels of glucose will go down, and then what will happen is your purse means the energy. Now when the glucose goes into the cell, now what happens is your purse is empty. So to speak, your glucose is now not there in the bloodstream, it's being used up by your cells. So now when there's less glucose in your body, in your blood, now you start to feel hungry again. So then you would want to eat again. But what happens is, see this here. So this conversion of a feeding state to a fasting state happens very fast. Whenever you eat something, you're emptying your cache very fast because it enters your cell, and that is why you feel hungry again. Now see, there is something called as glycogen in the liver and muscle. This glycogen is a stored form of energy. So because you're running out of cash and your purse is empty, if you don't have anything to eat from outside, your glycogen will be broken down. This glycogen now burns down and gives you that cash from inside. So your blood glucose levels rise again, even though you have not eaten something from outside. So you have some kind of stored form of energy inside, which is glycogen, and this will give you cash for some time. But the capacity of this glycogen store is not much. This glycogen store is used up quite fast. Think of this glycogen store as the house locker that you have inside your house, inside your cupboard. So there is some amount of cash which is inside, but it's not so much. So what will happen is this glycogen in the liver, which is nothing but the house locker cash, is used up quite fast, and your locker becomes empty very fast. And that is where the glucose levels will drop again. So just within a few hours of eating your food, your external glucose has been used up, the internal glycogen has been used up, and now you are basically running out of the cash. So that's a very big problem. So basically, just to summarize this, after a carb-rich diet, you would use up your resources quite fast and you would feel a lot of hunger. And so that is why you feel a lot of hunger on a high insulin and a high carb diet, because you have a lot of hunger, and some amount of that hunger is dissipated because the glycogen is being used up from inside. So this cycle keeps on repeating itself, because you eat again you eat carbohydrates, again your cash comes in for some time, again it's used up quite fast. So the more carbohydrate fuel that you eaten, the hungrier you would feel. It's a very common complaint that we get, that, oh doctor, we have to eat every few hours, otherwise we feel dizzy, we feel headache. And that's happening because you're just on a very carb rich diet. So the more carbs you eat, the hungrier you will feel just in a few hours. In fact, if your diet was fat and protein based, you would feel fuller for much longer. And that's why you have to keep on eating again and again a carbohydrate rich diet, and you are just dependent. Now we call this a carb dependent person. Now think of it this way. Think of it like a large fuel tanker. It has two fuel sources, as you can see, the yellow circle and the red circle. The yellow circle is the larger fuel it is carrying, and the red circle is the smaller amount of fuel that it is carrying. Similarly, you have two fuel sources in your body. The smaller red circle denotes the glycogen in the liver, and the bigger yellow circle denotes the body fat that you have, which is a much larger source of energy. But when you are on a carb rich diet, the only thing your body is accustomed to using is this internal glycogen, which is just the red circle that you're trying to use all the time. And this glycogen is such a small fuel source, not too much of capacity, so it gets empty very fast. You have to run to the gas station to fill up this small fuel source, and that's why you keep on eating again and again and again. Would it not be better to use this yellow circle? Would it not be better to use the larger fuel source? And that is what intermittent fasting actually does. Intermittent fasting basically switches your fuel sources, and now you'll be able to use the larger fuel source, which is the body fat, which is going to be melting down. And this body fuel is almost an unlimited amount of fuel that you have, and that is what intermittent fasting does. And so all that fat that you have accumulated inside over years and years and years of abuse and eating the wrong food, you are so fat inside. There's a lot of body fat, a lot of abdominal fat, fat in the organs, liver, almost giving fatty liver to so many people. That's going to be used up, and you will now be filling up your cash in the purse, not from external sources, not from glycogen inside, but from the fat in your liver and fat in your organ. In fact, that is why intermittent fasting which will then use the body fat, gives you much less hunger than you would perceive when you first hear about this intermittent fasting protocol. In fact, because you burn this internal fat so well in intermittent fasting, in fact, you would reduce the chances of fatty liver, you would burn the triglycerides in your system, you would free up your coronary arteries, your heart vessels gets freed up, your brain vessels get freed up. In fact, the chance of cardiovascular events, strokes, heart attacks, all these also reduce. Diabetes reduces. There are multiple uses and multiple benefits of using your internal body fat as a fuel source. So that is why it is so good to do this. You would feel, yes, less hunger. Also, you would free up a lot of this internal body fat, making you healthier. You would thin up, obviously, obesity, which is such a big epidemic, but also go down. But of course, this switching doesn't happen immediately, as you would expect. It takes 2 to 3 weeks for this fuel source or sources to be switched when you start intermittent fasting. So be patient. In 2 to 3 weeks, you will find the switching happening, and it's magical to see that. I've experienced it myself when I started doing intermittent fasting. As more and more my body started becoming used to this process, even if I did 24 hours, 25 hours, 26 hours fast, you would magically think, and just mentally you would be thinking, oh, I have not eaten for so much, but your body doesn't feel that hunger because somewhere inside your body fat is being used up, which is the entire intention of this intermittent fasting protocol. So for the first 2 to 3 weeks, when you would feel a little bit of hunger coming in, what are the practical tips to tackle this hunger during fasting? Let's see that. First point to understand is hunger comes in waves. When you feel hunger, you would believe that, oh, now I have to eat something. But if you just wait for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, you would find surprisingly your hunger actually goes down after that time. So one option is just ride out that wave. Don't allow that wave to control your eating patterns. You have to know it just goes away in some time. Water is a very good thing to do. Have a lot of water during the fasting, the phase of the intermittent fasting. Sometimes when you feel hunger, it's actually not hunger, it's actually thirst. And our body is not really accustomed to realize thirst so well as hunger. So you might feel hunger, but actually you're thirsty, you are dehydrated. So have a lot of water. In fact, water will give you a little bit of stretching sensation in your abdomen, in your tummy, and in fact, the hunger would go down by the time it passes off in 20 to 25 minutes. Some people think that, okay, let's have some artificial sweeteners in the fasting time. Let's not have sugar because that will break your fast. But no, artificial sweeteners are in fact in some way worse than the normal sugar because they trigger the amount of insulin production a lot. And in fact, the hunger would increase with that. So that is why you need to avoid them. You should try and physically remove yourself from all food stimuli during a fast because, as I said, fasting it can be easily broken if you just see food around you, because you can start feeling a bit of hunger just with that appetite, not the actual hunger getting stimulated by the sight and smell of food. It's good to stay busy during the fasting time because being busy will help you overcome that sensation of hunger. You're just too busy to think about hunger because that was not actually hunger. It was just an emotional response to eating, and just because you're busy, you might not even perceive that's a good ploy to be busy during your fasting time. Also, it's good to fast when the hunger hormone ghrelin is at its lowest, which is in the morning time. Usually at about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, you have the lowest ghrelin amounts. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone which is secreted by your body. So the lower hunger hormone you have, the more easily you're able to control that hunger. So that is why skipping breakfast is quite easy for people, but skipping lunch and dinner is more difficult because the ghrelin is increasing through the whole day. In fact, the nighttime ghrelin is the most and the maximum, and that's why hunger is most perceived at night. So I personally also have skipped breakfast and I am happy with lunch and dinner, and that has allowed me to live healthier. I've lost a lot of weight just with this change of my diet eating. It's good to have black tea and black coffee during your fasting time. Black coffee, I've made a separate video on what all you can have during the fasting time of intermittent fasting. You're free to see my channel for those tips as well. But just to summarize in a quick way on this slide, you can have black tea, black coffee, both. Try to avoid milk as far as possible. Apple cider vinegar is very good during the fasting time of intermittent fasting. Green tea is excellent. Green tea has a lot of antiviral immune modifying benefits, it has polyphenols, it is really a good agent to, it can even reduce blood pressure. So a lot of benefits with green tea. You can have chia seeds, you can have flax seeds, you can have pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds. You can have a lot of this during the fasting time. It will really help you take your mind away from hunger. You have to replace electrolytes. You have to eat a little bit of salt. If you feel a bit dizzy, you have a bit of headache, it's good to go to salt. So take a bit of lemon water, put a bit of salt into that. So it gives you lemon, it gives you vitamin C, it gives you water, it gives you electrolytes. Remember not to put sugar into it. All these are really very easy, important methods. You have to get enough sleep, because if you sleep for maybe 8 hours, 9 hours, then half of that fasting time is getting utilized during the sleep time itself. So you not perceive hunger. So if you shorten your sleep time, you're waking more, it's more difficult to get through the fasting window. So all these are really small practical tips of how you can get through the initial 2 to 3 weeks. This is Saurabh Jindal. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up on this. This is my attempt to change the world 1 kilo at a time. Thank you very much for your attention.